Welcome to the overview of the 10 building blocks of Chinuch. These building blocks, essentially, I call them 10 building blocks of Chinuch. They essentially cover all the areas that we need as mechanchim, teachers, educators, to cover for our children. It's not the actual curriculum per se, it's more like a framework. So let's start at the beginning. Always a good place to start. Our icon for the first building block is the Aleph base. Meaning to say, building block number one is language acquisition, or as we call it, Lashon Hatorah, the language of the Torah. So there are 10 components in this, and we're going to be covering that in the overview. In the actual training, you're going to get much more detail, but we're just doing 2 levels now. So in this quick overview, I'm just going to describe the 10 components. In a text-based system, which the educational system by and large really is, the Western society and certainly in the Shiva world, this is almost completely a text-based system. That means to say that if a child is not successful in reading accuracy and fluency, which we're going to break down the components for, I don't want to say he's doomed, but it's a tremendous handicap in a system that is so focused on textual skills that if they're not reading accurately and fluently, and we're going to see what the other components are as well, vocabulary, prefixes, and suffixes, being able to break a verse, a pasuk down, a mishnah, gemara, etc. In a text-based system, a child has to have a level of mastery, and we need to define what that level is. What's the minimum level? So there are 10 components, starting with number 1, Suras Aisias, the shape of the letters themselves. Children have to know the shapes of the letters. What does that mean? That means that their mind is able to distinguish, mavchin in Lashon Hatorah, between every single surah, every single shape, no matter what the subtle differences are. So, for example, a base and a vase, there's only a dagish in the base that distinguishes it from the vase. You've got a pei and a fei. You've got a nun and an end of nun, and you've got a vav. Oh, the nun and the gimel, they look similar. So some children actually get confused by those two. A mem and a tes, sometimes children get confused by those two. So there are certain letters which are known as mukhlafot. They easily get confused. And what you need for a child to have a total mastery is the specific shape of every single letter. We also want them to know the sound of the letter. If you subscribe to those who claim that each letter really has a sound, even without the nakuda, unless you want to subscribe to those who say the letter has no sound unless you put the nakuda in. Either way, you want the child to know a base has a b sound, gimel, g, dalad, d, hey, h, vav, v, zayin, z, het, ches, etc. So number 1 component is Suras Ais. Number 2 are the Nakudais. Number 3 is blending. You want the child to know all the Nakudais and all the Suras Aisias, all the shapes of all the letters, so they are ready for this number 3, which is blending. How do you now combine the Ais and its Nakuda and correctly pronounce the two? That will lead them to number 4, which is reading accuracy. Once they're reading one letter with its nakuda, now they're able to go to the next letter and its nakuda. Once they're able to start blending the letters with each other and the nakudas contained in or under or above the letters, that's called reading accuracy. We have 6 levels for reading accuracy and fluency, which we'll cover in the actual training. And it's a very, I would say, deceptively simple method to help a child self-correct. Correct themselves. That's the key when it comes to reading accuracy. Number 5 of this, 4 is reading accuracy, 5 is reading fluency. Number 6 of this is you want the children to be able to know the main vocabulary that's going to help them in their first graduation of reading, which is Chumash and Siddur for that matter. So once they've mastered reading accuracy and fluency, even while they're going to be ready. They're going to be ready for 2 and 3 and then 4 letter words. We'll start with 2 letter words, then 3, and then we'll go to 4. The reason why is really not specifically the number of letters per se, but really it's the syllables. So for example, the word dag is a 1-syllable word. Gun, ben. All these words are 2 letters. The advantage of teaching 2-letter words when teaching reading accuracy, fluency, and then building vocabulary The advantage in teaching two-letter words is very simple. For the most part, a two-letter word only has one nakuda under the first letter, which means the child is only reading the first letter and its nakuda and landing on the sound of the second letter. Gun, dun, ben, gum, of, aim, eights. All these are two-letter words where there's only one nakuda under the first letter. They're landing on the sound of the second. Then we'll graduate to three-letter words. Some three-letter words also have one syllable, like the word toiv. For example, there's a vav in the middle, but it's still only pronounced with one syllable, toiv. So we'll be covering that as well in the actual training. After they've graduated from reading accuracy fluency and we're starting to build vocabulary, we're not going to just arbitrarily choose words all over the Chumash. We've selected, there are many lists which you can identify the frequency of reappearance. So based on different lists, we have created photographs for the most commonly, most frequently reappearing words, and we have a photograph for each one of those. We have 303 shoroshim. I call them shoroshim because really, strictly speaking, in diktuk, in the laws of grammar, every single word in Lashon Hatorah, every single word in biblical Hebrew has a 2 or 3 letter root word. So that's called a shoresh, a root word, a source word. But what we will do, what we have is a 303, I call them shoroshim, they really are vocabulary words. These are the most frequently reappearing words in Chumash Bereshis. There are 16,258 words in the entire Genesis. Don't mind not checking it now when you take a break. So out of those 16,258 words, does a child need to know all of those words to master Chumash Bereshis? Of course not. Why? Because there are so many of those words which reappear again and again. That level of frequency is such that if you know those words which appear the most times, let's say 10 to 15 or even 20 times or more, guess what? You only need to know much less than 16,000. In fact, what is the number? Well, it really depends on what the formula is you want to go with. So let's say you take words which reappear somewhere between 10 and 20 times. So 303 shoroshim, 303 vocabulary words will give you access to 13,000 words in Chumash Bereshis. 13,000 out of 16,000 is 81%. That's a good deal. I think you should agree that's a really good deal. Oh, so once you know that these are the most commonly, frequently reappearing words in Chumash Bereshis, then you can drill these words. But not just drill in just the conventional sense, but what happens if you're going to review, as we discussed in Hashkafa of Chinuch, if you're going to review the words in lots of different ways. So it's not a matter of just 30 times or 40 times or 101 times, as Chazal give us those numbers for mastery in terms of repetition. But what happens if you go al pi darkai and you teach these words in many different ways, using dice, using yedids, fortune tellers, using string wraps, which we're going to see soon, using bingo games, using domino games. What happens if you've got lots of activities where the children are drilling the words in their strength, in their intelligence? So that's building vocabulary. The next level is number 7 and 8, which are prefixes and suffixes. So number 6 was vocabulary, number 7 is prefixes, number 8 is suffixes. We're following Rabbi Winter's language program called Lashon Hatorah, where he's divided all the prefixes and suffixes under 4 colored banners. What happens next is, and you're going to see with the actual materials when we go through this in a little bit more detail in the second part of this overview, what you're going to see is that if a child is going to learn all the prefixes and all the suffixes, and there are only 46 of them, now you add those to the 303 shoroshim, the 303 vocabulary words, essentially the child only needs to know 349 items to access 80+% of Chumash Bereshis, and for that matter, on a spot check, we haven't done a full computer analysis, but on a spot check of the rest of Chumash and Nevi'im Rishonim, these 303 shoroshim words will give you approximately 65 to 80% access to the rest of Chumash. Shmos, Vayikra, Bamidbar, Dvarim, and Yeshua, Shoftim, Shmuel, and Malachim. So that's a really good deal. So for 349 items, you can access literally tens of thousands of words. Number 9 of this is once a child knows the 3 composite parts of a word, the shoresh in the middle, 2 3-letter word, and the suffix, prefix added before, fixed on before the word, suffix from the word soif is fixed on the end of the word. Once the child knows those 3 components, he's able to what I'm calling decode. Decode means like a detective game. He looks at a word, it's like a code. What does that mean? Well, you take the word ben, which means child or son. Banim are children. Beni, my son. Banecha, your sons. Bincha, your son. So if you were to drill every prefix and suffix and each shoresh, then what ends up happening is the child, when he looks at a word, he can identify what is a 2 or 3-letter root. Oh, it's ben. What are the suffixes? Oh, well, you've got a yud and a cha. Oh, the yud is plural. Oh, so cha means you or your. Oh, banecha, your sons. Very good. What happens if you look at the prefixes? Oh, you got a vav and a lamed. Ulevanecha, and 2 or 4, your sons. Oh, so a child can decode. He can take the word ben in the middle, separate the vav and the lamed as prefixes, the yud and the chaf as suffixes, then reconstruct it. I'm calling that decoding. He can decode the words. Once he's able to decode, that brings to the final part of language acquisition in the way we're describing it right now, and that is analysis. You see, what is analysis? Analysis is paying attention to detail, being able to make sense out of the details. And the more detail you pay attention to, the more your brain is filing these details, and the more details you now have to compare similarities, contrast differences, and then notice subtle distinctions. So once the child has all the suras oisius and the nakudais and the blending, and he's reading accurately and fluently, and now he's building vocabulary, prefixes and suffixes, he's ready for number 9, which we said is decoding, and all that is preparation for the real learning. What's the real learning? Number 10, analysis. Iyun. Iyun is a very important word. It reveals itself. What's the 2-letter root of iyun? Oh, ayin. Ayin. Oh, ayin, yud, nun, if you want to call it a 3-letter word. Oh, interesting. What does your eye do? Your eye pays attention to incredible detail, color, contrast, shade. Your eye is giving your brain information. The more you pay attention to the details of the letters, the combination of letters, where there's a letter that's missing. Oh, toldais is without a vav. Oh, the word nayach is repeated in the same pasuk. Eila toldais nayach, nayach. That makes no sense. And when you start noticing, because your eye is paying attention, me'ayin, you are looking more deeply. What's looking more deeply mean? You're looking with more attention. You're paying deeper attention. To what? Detail. Oh, so the concept of analysis is that the more detail a child is able to pay attention to, the more you're preparing his mind for future analysis, iyun. So I would say that even though when you come to Mishnayos and certainly to Gemara, children whose minds are more adept to iyun, their brains become more revealed to the teacher, and the gap widens between them and children who are not getting the iyun, the abstract thinking, the comparisons, contrasting of differences, and they're falling behind, and they start rote memorizing the information but don't understand the actual analysis. So what we're saying is that if we're going to teach the children these 10 components, well, let's call them the first 9, you are preparing their mind, you're developing their mind, you're fine-tuning their mind to pay attention to detail, to the shoresh, to the prefix, to the suffix, and now that enables a child to analyze the text. What is analysis? Paying attention to detail. What does that mean? That means that the more details you're paying attention to in a pasuk, the more you'll be able to analyze it, the more you'll be able to notice deliberate inconsistencies in the pasuk. Yes, the pasuk is supposed to be Lashon Yachid, and yet it's Lashon Rabim. It's supposed to be singular, but it's plural, or plural and it's supposed to be singular. oh, it's supposed to be Lashon Zara for male gender, but no, it's Lashon Nekeva for female gender. Oh, or vice versa. There are grammatical inconsistencies throughout the Chumash, and that's deliberate. There are no mistakes in the Oraisa of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. There are no mistakes in HaKadosh Baruch Hu's perfect Torah. Torah Hashem Tamima, says David HaMelech. Tamim, Chazal throughout Tanakh tell us the word Tamim means without a mum. There are no blemishes. There's not even a scratch of a blemish, because the Torah is Tamim, it's perfect. Oh, so that means that when you see a seeming mistake, that is for your mind to pay attention to, because hidden behind there is a treasure. We're going to talk about that later if you haven't heard it on a previous video, the beautiful mashal from the Baal Shem Tov HaKadosh, that it explains the interrelationship between the Torah Shebechtav, the written Torah, and the Torah Sheba'al Peh, and the oral law. So these are the 10 components for Lashon HaKodesh. That's icon number 1. So for a child who's in a text-based system, which all our children are, to be able to go through these 10 components enables the child's mind to be developed for analysis, which is what they're going to be spending a lot of time on, and that's what all the Mefarshim are doing. All the commentaries are essentially looking at the words of our Chumash, Nach, Mishnah, Gemara, and being me'ayin. They are analyzing with a critical eye. They're looking very carefully for any deviation of detail in order to draw out the hidden information contained, which is part of the Torah Sheba'al Peh. So that's building block number 1, and I think you agree, I would call it a foundational skill.